an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Well, here we go. We're wrapping up the week here on Now and Next. Dave Trafford here for Story Studio Network. Welcome in. It's the holiest weekend of the calendar for the Christians of the world as we head into Easter. I know, it's Christmas. No, not really. That dying and coming back from the dead is kind of important in the whole picture. Yeah. So, remember when I was running a youth choir, this was a crazy week. Because we were on deck to provide music Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And every celebration was different. You know, wasn't like you could just have your set list and play the same show 4 nights. Wasn't that kind of thing. So here's hoping that you will get some downtime with the family as we mark the Easter weekend. We'll do it in a variety of ways, I expect. Some will be attending family dinners. Others will be attending services this weekend. Of course, it's Passover as well. So it's kind of either way, it is a weekend for gathering and reflection. So as we make our turn into a slow spring, right? It's slow coming. I don't know where you were yesterday, but here in Toronto, we got hit by this crazy all-day rain event. I mean, there was flooding in some areas and, caused traffic problems and so on. But my studio is in the basement of the house. And generally speaking, I don't hear a whole lot of activity based on the way we built this thing. Big noise for sure. I was the only one in the house yesterday. And I'm doing some editing, working on the show for my friends at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. By the way, if you should check that show out, it is the coolest stuff they talk about. I'm telling you. It is the Engineering with Nature initiative, and it's just awesome. So check it out, Engineering with Nature, and you'll find it where you listen to this podcast. Anyway, I was doing some work for them. We're wrapping up season 5. And by the way, that episode on the way, it's the coolest thing. It's about how insurance companies are creating policies for municipalities, etc., that are on shorelines. So, anywhere around the ocean. So that's a great deal of municipality shoreline, certainly in the United States and in Canada. And the degree to which you make an effort, for example, to rehabilitate or nurture the coral reef, your insurance goes down. Because, you're wondering why? Well, I'll tell you. Because the coral reef acts as a natural barrier to any of the damaging waves that can come ashore and ruin shoreline or cause flooding. Yeah, they call it the Great Barrier Reef for a reason, right? So they've got this really cool mechanism now that allows for that the actuarials to get involved and take a look at nature-based solutions for mitigating the damage done by severe weather, severe storms, all that kind of. So that's coming up. That'll drop next week. But this week, the most recent show was on blue carbon. That was fascinating as well. How we're looking at, we did the whole show on forestry and how the forest system and the forest sector is capturing carbon, and all the wood around you is capturing carbon. It's great for the environment. Well, the blue carbon, which is all happens like the ocean, but there's the vegetation around the shorelines is really specific. So and in some cases is better at capturing carbon than our boreal forest. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent here. Engineering with Nature. I was working on that show, and all of a sudden it sounded like a home invasion And boom, I thought, oh my God, somebody's crashing through the front door. And I come roaring out of the studio. And as soon as I stepped out into the main room, I thought, okay, that's thunder and lightning. So it was an epic storm. And it was just a crazy time to be, just watching this roll through lightning. I mean, it was very, very frightening. So anyway, it was kind of a nuts day. So lots to talk about as we head into this holiday weekend. And it's always interesting to me when I talk to those people who observe politics and elections. And that is to say that they will, the campaigns matter. Our friend John Wright at Maru Public Opinion will always tell you that. But what really matters for John and his ilk is the opportunity for family to sit down over a meal during a campaign and to see what kind of effect that has on voting. We're into that campaign certainly here in Toronto, the mayor's race, and we're also in a long weekend. And as I said off the top, there'll be a lot of people gathering with family and so on. And I would be shocked if you live in Toronto and gather in Toronto, the topic of the city, the state of the city, and the mayor's race don't come up in some form or fashion. Whether somebody's relating a story about they're traveling on the TTC or how, the worries that they have about services and the homeless, whatever it might be, violence on the streets. So this will be the first of two long weekends in this campaign. There will be the Easter weekend, and then there will be the Victoria Day weekend, which is going to be about a month out from Election Day. So the rhythm of this campaign will be an interesting one to watch. And we did talk to David Coletto earlier in the week. He is the CEO at Abacus Data, and he made an important observation when it comes to the polls. Take them for what they are now. They do not represent what is going to happen on voting day. And we say that all the time, but people tend to not really hear that. They'll say, well, you had him out by 12 points at the beginning and he lost, and so what are you, an idiot? You got it wrong again. Well, no, that's not how polls work. But particularly in this case, because we've got such a broad base of candidates, 7, maybe 8, who have a shot at winning. We've said that several times. So that's going to make the horse race number really difficult to, consider a solid number, or certainly not a predictor. It's only going to be a snapshot, literally, of when that poll was taken. Now, what will be interesting is if there's a poll that comes out Monday after the long weekend of Easter, what does that look like? What will the poll look like on Victoria Day? Then, okay, that long weekend has shifted from here to here. And it will be curious to see how any conversation around the dinner table might reflect it in some of that polling. But again, a snapshot in time. There are at least 30 names at last count on the ballot for the mayor's race here in Toronto. And, it's an effort. It takes a commitment to actually put your name forward for public office at any point, right? We're also cynical about the politicians in our life, and in some cases, for the right reason. I would not for a minute suggest or insult any person in public life to suggest that Donald Trump, for example, is in there for the sake of public service. He's not. So start any conversation that you want about Trump. He's not there for public service. Unfortunately, the likes of Trump begin to be the meme for politicians, right? And that becomes the culture of cynicism and negativism, all that kind of stuff that goes with it. But let's face it, the people who get into civic politics, local politics, municipal, provincial, and federal politics, for the most part, they're doing it because they want to help the community. They have a concern about their own local community. So to put your name on the ballot is, I think, an important thing to do. So good on you for all those 30 people who have done it. But for every one of them, there's probably 3 more who considered it and for whatever reasons decided this is not the time, or I'm not going to, it's not for me. I can't make that commitment. One such character was Josh Colle. Josh was a city councillor here in Toronto, 2 terms. Was also the chair of the TTC, the Toronto Transit Commission, for a time. And shortly after that February 10th announcement by John Tory that he was stepping down, announced his intention to do so, I ran into Josh at the rink. We were playing hockey. And I just jokingly said to him, "So, are you running?" Thinking that he would say, no, I'm not going to do it. But he raised an eyebrow, and for him, the expression on his face told me, he may well be considering it.
I heard that news and was as surprised as, I guess, anyone else. And equally surprising, my phone started to ring with some really flattering and kind suggestions and urgings that I take it on. And as much as I dismissed them early on, when they kept coming, you start to have those thoughts and even some of those conversations. And it's also not lost on me, and maybe I'm the product of really lucky timing, but since I left in 2018, it actually has not been the greatest run or ride for the city. And so, like any resident, you see what's happening out there and you're concerned. And if you've ever had your foot in that arena, some part of you thinks, well, I know what they should do, or I think I know what they could do better in this area. And so, some of that starts to come to the fore, and you start to think about, what the city needs, or what, they those in those seats should be doing in terms of actions. And so through all that, my counterbalance to it always was my family and kind of why I left politics 4 years ago. And I had this fleeting moment where I was like, I've got 3 boys who are teenagers, and I think pretty much, I hope they're around forever, and they want to be around their old man when he's older, but they're about to be gone, right? And so I kind of think like I probably have 3 more years with them. And that was ultimately my kind of deciding factor.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one for sure. And it's, I think on the one hand, everybody who has thrown their hat in the ring to some degree has had to, deal with that question. I think Mike Layton had the same kind of consideration. Yeah. There was a lot going on there, and particularly when you look at the state that the city's in, the demands around that job, and say what you will about John Tory's legacy, I think to some degree he set a standard in terms of what we expect from a mayor in terms of being on the job at a very high level. So, not to say that the previous mayors weren't doing that, but John is our most recent experience with it. And trying to emulate or keep up or meet that expectation, I think was going to be a real challenge for whoever lands this job.
Yeah, you're right. So John, whatever you think of him, you can't accuse him of not working hard and being out there and being there. And he was. And even as I worked with him, you saw the pace, and you knew he was doing the work. He was, he actually was reading the briefings and the reports, and he was, all over the city. And I give him a ton of credit for that. And I'm not sure that's the model everyone has to follow. I kind of know my own DNA on that. And, even when I was in kind of the councillor role along with TTC chair, I can't do it halfway. And so you end up being at everything. It's not as high profile as what a mayor is doing. In terms of the challenge of where the city's at, maybe I'm a glutton for punishment, but that's kind of what I think for a lot of us who consider serving this way is some of the draw to it, because, you see things that you believe you can help fix or need fixing. And if I think back to why I initially ran in 2010, that was kind of what it was. It wasn't because I thought it'd be a cool gig and easier than the work I was doing. It was, as you get out there and you get to know your neighborhood and your community, and you start to see things that you think aren't right and they're tricky and thorny and complicated, that's often what the draw is, to want to get in there and see what you can do.
Well, and some of that's DNA. I mean, for those who don't know,
Yeah, maybe literally. Maybe I used the wrong, right or wrong expression. Yeah.
Your dad has been a career politician after he was a high school teacher. So, and clearly, again, whether you, and I always say this to people, whether you like what happens at City Hall or not, you have the ability to kind of, touch the politics that is affecting you probably most closely.
Totally.
And let's not underestimate. I mean, to your point around the work and the effort and the energy that goes into this, and the challenges that it poses for family, it cannot be underestimated or understated.
No, it's significant. And as I kind of was completing my second term, and really proud of what I've accomplished. To your point, right? You can kind of touch and feel in local politics what you've done, and you can point to a park that's been improved, or Main Street that's beginning to be revitalized, or how, like, I've seen social housing built in my ward where it wasn't or hasn't been built much in many other places in the city. So you see that and you get that great sense of accomplishment, and there's always another one to keep going. So it's wonderful and really rewarding that way. But at the same time, most residents see their councillor as their go-to, their community advocate. They don't even really care what the orders of government are. I constantly was fielding calls about other order of government issues. And then the other part of it is that there's just an expectation, and you get into that rhythm of just being out there. When I ran for re-election, I was kind of, looking back on my voting record, because, I was going to be tested at the doors on how I voted at City Hall. I knocked on, and I know it sounds cliche, but I literally knocked on thousands and thousands of doors. And I could count on my hands the number of times people brought up issues around my voting at City Hall. What they brought up negatively, positively, was the amount they felt I was out there, right? So city councillors are really judged often at the polls on being visible and accessible and seeming to be supporting the community. And so with that relationship you end up building with residents, you're at every event, you're at the schools, you're at, every community celebration. You're also looking at those fences and potholes and hedges and all those things. And that becomes the unexpected or maybe unwritten part of the job. And you do it full bore. And so with that, and then you throw on a role like the TDC chair, you're not seeing your kids that much. And I almost feel selfish saying that. But knowing what the mayor's job entails, it's really that on steroids almost.
Let's look at the field. Bob Richardson
Yeah.
and I were talking about this on Monday when they released the hounds and everybody could sign up, and away we go. His expectation is that Olivia Chow will step into this, considering the amount of support and the call for a strong left candidate. But at this point, it's interesting to me to see how everybody is essentially, I talked to David Coletto too. He was looking at the polling and how challenging it's going to be to have a horse race poll that means anything in this campaign. The point being that everybody seems to be looking at the same issue from a different angle, and it's going to be really difficult for any of them to distinguish themselves.
Yeah, it will be. And you can already see it. We're only a few days in, and you're totally right. They've all gravitated to, the issues that I think are what we know are top of mind. But maybe my cynical side will say that the polls are telling them that they have to be strong on. So they all have a different angle or wrinkle on it. But to date, it's been a pretty similar approach and message from all of them, I would say. My guess is Olivia Chow will be in, and off the hop, she may kind of gravitate towards that too. So at a certain point, somebody is going to have to take a bit of a leap of faith on an issue or an approach that distinguishes themselves, because with such a crowded field, I don't know how you in a short period, I don't know how you kind of get to the top of the heap.
Yeah, well, and if you do the head count, I kind of, said there's probably 6, possibly 8 who have a shot at winning this thing. And normally wouldn't say that, except, you and I were chatting earlier about the idea that you might only need 18% to win this thing.
Yeah, you know what? If this was longer, I would say you'd have kind of a bit of that, I don't call it a war of attrition, but you know what I mean?
Yep,
Where
yep.
there would be that, but it's, I don't know if there's enough time for that to develop and evolve where someone might kind of then see where the trend is going and drop out. We're not going to know a ton more even in a week or two. Already you're starting to get closer. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be a low percentage win. I think name recognition then for that reason is massive. And so Olivia Chow has it to start. So I think she polls first immediately just because of that. I think Saunders' name recognition is pretty high. I think the others will need to manufacture it. And so that might be a reflection of who can raise the most money, because, how else can you kind of get your name out there if not by, through paid channels?
Yeah, well, and even then, paid channels is going to be a challenge, even if you had the budget, because when we look at the, again, the short runway here, and where do you put that ad spend? Are there more people listening to you because you pop up on the morning talk show or on CP20? I mean, there's a whole, the strategy behind it. It will be interesting to see where that plays out and what kind of an effect it has.
Yeah,
right?
For sure. And I think it'll tell us something about just even, we're getting this kind of little, test on how elections are evolving really quickly in Canada. We often kind of talk about the states and all the kind of the interesting things they're doing with different technology and different types of polling. I think this will be really interesting for that, in a short burst race. If you say you had all the money, to your point, are you going with conventional radio? I don't know. I don't know what will get you up there, but that's going to be the effort on several of them to try and get their name out there for sure.
I would think that, again, I'm nobody's asking my advice, but if it were me, I would think that a lot of that advertising would also be focusing on getting the vote out. So it would be a very specific kind of campaign, making sure that we're advertising and promoting the candidate where your likely voters are, as opposed to sort of a broadcast, broad range.
Yeah, I think there will be some of that for sure, and I know the polling's sophisticated enough to kind of dictate where those audiences might be and how you might best reach them, even if you don't identify them necessarily as a buy loud voter. There might be certain demographic characteristics that make you think that person will be a likely buy loud voter, so you're gonna target them there. I'm of the mind that that'll of course help. It's one way to get profile. I think this could be the playbook I would look at is the David Miller playbook for this election. He was not the left's choice during that election. He was not really anyone's choice to start. He found an issue and a message. So the message was clean up City Hall. Yeah. That one resonated. It worked for Rob Ford too. And they couldn't be any more, kind of different on the political spectrum. But that Island Airport issue was really fascinating because I contend that most people had never used the Island Airport, who had an opinion on it, lived nowhere near it. But all of a sudden, there was that one guy who kind of was like trying to stop the jets. And it brought him a bit above the fray. And so I think in some shape or form on an issue like that, and they've all captured the one issue of the day, like that public safety one. So I don't think it's going to be that will distinguish you, or you do it by somehow being larger than life. And I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have that character in the running right now. No. And to your point, though, and we're going back to 2003 with Miller, but when you initially we talked about name recognition. There was Nunziata in that race. Barbara Hall was in that race. John Tory was in that race. So there were a lot of folks who had name recognition, maybe even more than Miller.
Yeah, I think so. I
right? And
think
he
so.
emerged anyway.
He did. And so how do you, yeah, I guess, I don't think there's someone who's going to strike lightning here in this group. Um, like we've seen at times, and you typically see that, I think, a little bit more. Well, maybe I'm going to correct myself. Rob Ford did. He was kind of lightning in a bottle. So I think, if that's not going to happen, you're going to have to find ways. I think the interesting thing will be as candidates start to realize that and their teams do, there will become a bit of this very fine line to walk as whether you're going to look desperate, trying almost something that will be deemed like a stunt,
Mm-hmm.
versus just on the other side of that line that's like, oh, that's really innovative and different thinking. I like that person. And as the clump of candidates stay tight, some will try to do those things, and especially from some of the further in the back candidates, you're going to see things like that too.
Yeah, and the other thing is that right now they're sort of running with a bumper sticker slogan on public safety. However, they're coming at it to some degree. They're running against the federal Liberals, saying, "Where the hell have you been?
Sure.
The whole city is red, and we had such a a lame budget last week that does nothing for the city." So they're doing that, but it'll be interesting to see not just who gets innovative in terms of their ideas, who starts to run against whom, who calls
Yeah.
out like if Dave calls out Josh, okay, that says something about my campaign and what I think of you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is going to start to happen again as someone separates and people identify who kind of has their vote and kind of is interrupting their path there. I think the other person that they may decide to run against is the premier.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll all have to make that calculus and decide, if you can't manufacture it by running against a current sitting mayor, and there's no one in the race that's kind of enough of a front runner to be your foil, could the premier be that? And we've seen it, right? Like between provincial and federal politics, where I feel like Trudeau at one point was running against Ford, and other premiers have run against Trudeau, not their opponents. And so, could that become, kind of a foil for someone? And the interesting thing about that, not to get too much into the back rooms, but for a bunch of the leading candidates, they're pretty strongly backed by a lot of progressive conservatives. And so I don't know how comfortable they would feel with that approach. And so that will be a calculus, I think, that they'll all be considering at some point, at least.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when you start to look at the back rooms, there is, some are more heavily weighted, maybe a little bit more conservative, but in all cases, in terms of at least 4 or 5 of them, it would appear they've got a pretty good constituency on both sides of the aisle there. So I don't know if that's because they're hoping that they'll be greater than the sum of their parts, or they're hedging their bets depending on how they're going to have to negotiate with the feds and the province.
I think it's much more utilitarian than that. I think we think that candidates go and build teams. People who need a candidate go out and search for them.
Mm.
That's my impression. And so, you think about it. If your business relies on access to government or speedy development approvals, or just a regime that's friendly to your sector, those people need to be connected. And so I think what typically happens is there's a bit of a run of those interests to candidates, and they get into the camp of a horse they think can win. I think it's been strange the last couple times because there's really only been one. So everyone kind of shoehorns themselves into Team Tory to say they were on on the team and on the side and have access. And now there's a decision to be made. And so it's been an interesting to see that stampede to various candidates. And I think typically that tends to be conservative aligned and liberal aligned people, just because they're in those spaces, and they'll find the vessel or the vehicle that they think can best kind of advanced.
So even now that you say that, I wonder whether or not some of the candidates start running against the team behind a candidate, in as much as, for example, Brad Bradford already being criticized because one of his backers represents the company that was going to build the spa on the Ontario Place site. So it's a long way down the road to get to the rabbit hole, but all of a sudden you've associated yourself with the guy who wants to, ruin
Yeah.
Ontario Place.
Yeah, there will be that. I've seen it already. I think that stuff really keeps campaigns fretting and busy. Thing, and I think you and I know, and still have to always remind yourself, is that 99% of the voters have no idea who any of those people are.
That's right.
Most of them don't actually know who the candidates are yet. And so that really causes a lot of angst and tension between campaigns and in campaigns, and there'll people be in a back room talking about how that affects, their message. I think unless it starts to, and it rarely does, kind of get to the level where, the media is talking about it, it tends to stay on Twitter and probably just further entrenches people in their negative views of a certain candidate. If you're already not going to like Brad Bradford, that will just give you your kind of a little more currency to, kind of validate your feelings. But it does stress campaigns, and they do spend a lot of energy on it, because you're in the thick of it, and you kind of can't see past it. But yeah, there'll be articles on it, and there'll be lots of social media chatter on it for sure.
Well, the consultants all like this because, they out of all of this is big business for them. And I don't say that disparaging. I mean, I get what they're doing. This is all good for that part of the economy for sure. Josh Colle, you have a standing invitation anytime. As we get through the campaign, it'd be good to see what you see and hear what you hear as we get closer to Election Day.
Yeah, it'd be great. I think things are going to move so quickly that our conversation could be, really interesting and really different in just a matter of days. So
well, the next time we chat, I want to kind of dig in a little bit more in terms of your background on infrastructure at EY, but also considering the focus on what's going on the transit system in your years as the chair at the TTC.
Yeah.
I'll give you a week to come up with a solution.
Okay, done.
Josh Colle is former city councillor here in Toronto, the chair of the TTC, and currently a senior VP at EY. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Dave.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Now and Next is produced by Becky Coles. Our production manager is Jamie Nickerson. Audio editors are Mike Trutler and Drew Garner. And our sonic logo designer is Greg McDonald. Our executive producers are Dave and Aaron Trafford.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.